Hey everyone, welcome back to another exciting episode of our podcast. I'm Adam, and today we're diving into a topic that's not only fun but incredibly effective: the power of listening. We're going to explore how podcasts, audiobooks, and music can supercharge your English learning journey. Trust me, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss.
And I'm Sophia. I'm so excited to join Adam today because, honestly, listening has been a game changer for me. Whether you're tuning into a podcast while doing chores, getting immersed in a good audiobook, or jamming to your favorite songs, listening helps you learn English in such a natural and enjoyable way.
Exactly, Sophia. I feel like so many people underestimate the power of just listening. It's like you're absorbing the language without even realizing it. But let's be real. It's not just about hearing words. It's about understanding the rhythm, the tone, and even picking up on those small expressions we don't learn in textbooks.
Totally. And the best part? You can listen anywhere, while commuting, working out, or even just relaxing. It's learning without the pressure. So, today, we're going to break it all down. Why listening works, how to make the most of podcasts, audiobooks, and music, and some practical tips to get started right away.
That's right. So grab your headphones, get comfortable, and let's dive into how you can boost your English skills just by listening. Ready, Sophia?
Ready, let's do this!
All right, Sophia, let's start with the basics. Listening seems so simple, but it's one of the most powerful tools for learning a language. Why is that?
That's a great question, Adam. Listening plays a crucial role in language learning because it's how we naturally acquire language. Think about how babies learn to speak. They don't start with grammar rules or writing exercises. They begin by listening to their parents and the people around them. Their brains absorb the sounds, rhythms, and patterns of the language before they ever say their first word. Listening is how we build a foundation for understanding.
That's so true. I've heard that when you listen to a language regularly, your brain starts recognizing common patterns, even if you don't understand every word. Is that right?
Exactly. When you listen to English, your brain is constantly processing sounds and making connections, even on a subconscious level. Over time, this improves your comprehension and helps you pick up vocabulary and sentence structures naturally. It's almost like your brain is training itself without you realizing it.
That's fascinating. And it's not just about understanding words, right? It's about understanding the flow of the language.
Absolutely. Listening helps you grasp the rhythm, intonation, and natural pronunciation of English. These are things you can't fully learn from a textbook. For example, when native speakers talk, they often link words together or drop certain sounds. Listening regularly helps you get used to these patterns, which is key to sounding more fluent.
Right, like when someone says, "What are you doing?" It often sounds more like, "What you doing?"
Exactly. Those little nuances are what make English sound natural. Listening trains your ear to pick up on these details, which also makes it easier to understand real conversations.
Now, I read somewhere that listening is actually one of the fastest ways to improve language skills. Is there any science to back that up?
Yes. Research shows that listening activates multiple areas of the brain at once: your auditory cortex, memory centers, and even the parts responsible for emotion and context. This makes listening a highly effective way to absorb language. Plus, listening involves contextual learning. When you hear a word in a sentence or story, your brain uses the context to figure out its meaning, which helps you remember it better.
Wow, so it's like giving your brain a full workout. And it makes sense why it's so important to include listening in your daily routine. But let me ask you this. What about beginners? Doesn't listening to English feel overwhelming if you don't understand much yet?
That's a common concern, but the good news is that you don't need to understand every word for listening to be effective. Start with simple content, like slow-paced podcasts, audiobooks for kids, or even songs with repetitive lyrics. The goal isn't to understand everything. It's to get used to the sounds of the language and train your brain to recognize patterns. Over time, comprehension will improve naturally.
That's really encouraging, Sophia. So, for anyone listening who might feel intimidated, just remember, it's okay to start small. Even a little listening each day can make a big difference.
Exactly. Consistency is the key. It's like planting seeds in your brain. The more you listen, the more those seeds grow into fluency.
Now that we understand the science behind listening, let's dive into one of the most powerful tools for language learners, podcasts. Sophia, I know you're a big fan of using podcasts for learning. Why do you think they're such a game changer for improving English skills?
Absolutely, Adam. Podcasts are amazing for learning English because they offer something that other tools don't. They're conversational. When you listen to podcasts, especially those focused on language learning, you get to hear how people actually speak in real life, the rhythm, the pauses, and even the small expressions that make a conversation sound natural. And the best part, you can listen to them anytime, anywhere. You can have a lesson while walking, cooking, or even working out.
Yeah, podcasts are super flexible that way, and the range of topics is endless. You can find podcasts on literally anything you're interested in, from technology to storytelling to even true crime. I imagine that can help learners stick with it because they're listening to content that excites them, right?
Exactly. That's one of the best things about podcasts. They're available on every possible topic. If you're passionate about travel, there are podcasts for that. If you love books, history, or even pop culture, there's something for everyone. And the beauty of this is that you're not just learning vocabulary, you're also learning about culture, history, and other subjects while improving your language skills.
I love that. So, it's not just about learning English, it's about connecting with different ideas and people. But let's talk strategy here. How do beginners start using podcasts without feeling overwhelmed?
Great question. I always tell beginners to start with podcasts that are specifically designed for language learners. These tend to have slower speech and simpler vocabulary. For example, podcasts like The English We Speak or ESL Pod are great because they break down phrases, explain grammar points, and introduce vocabulary in a clear way.
That's really helpful. So start with something slow and focused on language learning. But what about for those who are a little more advanced? Can they still benefit from podcasts?
Definitely. Once you're comfortable with the basics, you can start listening to podcasts that are more natural or aimed at native speakers. I'd recommend podcasts that focus on storytelling or interviews, like The Moth or TED Talks Daily. These will expose you to different accents, idiomatic expressions, and more complex sentence structures. Plus, you get to hear how people actually talk, speed, pauses, and all.
Right. So it's all about leveling up your listening as you progress. I also hear that many podcasts offer transcripts or show notes. How important is that?
Transcripts are a game changer. They allow you to read along while listening, which helps reinforce new vocabulary and sentence structures. Even if you don't understand everything right away, following along with the transcript helps your brain make connections. And once you're familiar with the content, you can try listening without the transcript to see how much you can catch on your own.
That's a great tip. So, start with transcripts, then slowly work your way up to listening without them. But here's a question. Do you think it's helpful to listen to the same episode multiple times?
Absolutely. Repetition is key when learning any language. Listening to the same podcast episode multiple times allows you to pick up on things you might have missed the first time. You'll notice new words, phrases, or even pronunciation that didn't stand out before. Plus, each time you listen, you'll get better at understanding the flow and rhythm of the conversation.
So, it's not about trying to listen to a ton of different podcasts. It's about going deep with a few episodes and really absorbing them.
Exactly. It's about quality over quantity. Pick a few episodes, really listen and immerse yourself in them. And the best part? You can listen to podcasts at your own pace. You're in control of your learning journey.
It sounds like podcasts are a fantastic way to build language skills. And the best part is, you can make it fun. So, for anyone listening, if you haven't yet, start exploring some podcasts. Try one today, and let us know what you think.
Exactly. Start small, find topics that interest you, and build that listening habit. I promise it's worth it.
All right, now that we've talked about podcasts, let's move on to another fantastic tool for language learners: audiobooks. I think audiobooks are often overlooked when it comes to improving English, but Sophia, you've been a huge advocate for them. Why are audiobooks such a powerful tool for language learning?
Great question, Adam. Audiobooks are incredible because they allow you to immerse yourself in the language for longer periods of time. Unlike podcasts, which are usually shorter and more fragmented, audiobooks offer a deep, uninterrupted listening experience. You get to listen to entire stories, which helps you absorb vocabulary, sentence structures, and the natural flow of the language in context. Plus, audiobooks often feature professional narrators who enunciate words clearly, making it easier to pick up pronunciation.
Right. So, with audiobooks, it's not just about listening to the words, it's about getting lost in a story, which helps you learn more naturally. But do you think audiobooks are for everyone? Or is it better for more advanced learners?
Good question. I think audiobooks are great for all levels, but beginners might want to start with easier material. Think about starting with children's books or young adult novels. These books use simpler language, and the stories are engaging, which keeps you hooked. As you progress, you can move on to more complex books. The key is to choose content that interests you, so you're motivated to keep listening.
That's such a good point. When you're listening to something you enjoy, the language becomes much easier to absorb. So, what's your recommendation for a beginner who wants to start with audiobooks?
For beginners, I recommend starting with classic children's books. Books like The Adventures of Winnie the Pooh or Charlotte's Web are great. These stories are simple but rich in language, and they often have clear narrative structures. Another option is audiobooks that are adaptations of popular films or TV shows. This way, you're already familiar with the storyline and the characters, so the language will be easier to follow.
Nice. Those are some excellent suggestions. But I'm curious, what do you think makes audiobooks better for language immersion compared to other listening activities?
Great question. One of the biggest advantages of audiobooks is that they offer full immersion in the language. When you listen to an audiobook, you're hearing a continuous stream of language in context. This helps you learn not just isolated words, but also how they fit into sentences and conversations. The more you listen, the more your brain gets used to understanding ideas without translating every single word. It's a much deeper form of learning compared to shorter, isolated podcast episodes.
That's a great point. It's like you're fully surrounded by the language, just like you would be if you were living in an English-speaking country. But what about people who might get lost in a longer audiobook? Any tips for staying focused?
Staying focused can be tricky, especially with longer audiobooks. My first tip would be to listen in shorter segments. Try listening for 15 to 20 minutes at a time, and then take a break. You can also pause the audiobook after every chapter or even every few pages, reflect on what you've learned, and check your understanding. Another great tip is to follow along with the text if you can to reinforce the words you're hearing. This gives you a double impact: hearing and reading.
That's a great way to combine reading and listening. And for anyone who's just starting out, I think it's important to remember that it's okay if you don't catch every word or phrase. It's all about the overall understanding.
Exactly. Don't get discouraged if you don't understand everything on the first listen. The goal is to get used to the rhythm of the language, and gradually, you'll start picking up more and more. It's also okay to revisit chapters or scenes if you didn't quite get them the first time. Repetition is key, and the more you listen, the more you'll internalize the language.
Great advice, Sophia. So, once you're comfortable with audiobooks, how do you use them to improve your speaking skills?
Audiobooks are fantastic for improving speaking skills too. You can practice shadowing, which is when you repeat what the narrator says as they say it. This helps improve your pronunciation, intonation, and fluency. Start by pausing the audiobook and repeating a sentence or two, then try to match the pace and tone of the narrator. Over time, this will make your speaking sound more natural.
Wow, shadowing sounds like a fun way to practice. So, audiobooks aren't just for passive listening, they're actually a great tool for active language practice.
Exactly. Audiobooks give you the chance to practice listening, speaking, and even thinking in English. By absorbing stories in English, you start to think more naturally in the language. It's a full immersion experience without leaving your home.
Audiobooks are definitely an underrated tool for language learners. So, if you're looking to really immerse yourself in English, start listening to audiobooks. Whether you're at the beginner or advanced level, there's something for everyone.
Exactly. And don't forget, it's all about enjoying the process. The more you enjoy the material, the easier and more fun it will be to learn.
Now, let's dive into something that everyone loves: music. If you're anything like me, you've probably learned a few phrases or words just by listening to your favorite songs. But Sophia, how exactly can music help improve your English skills?
Music is one of my favorite tools for language learning, Adam. It's fun, it's engaging, and, most importantly, it's repetitive. When you listen to a song, you hear the same words and phrases over and over again. This repetition helps your brain remember the vocabulary and the way words are used in context. Plus, songs are full of everyday expressions, slang, and idiomatic phrases that you might not find in textbooks.
I love that point. Music really exposes you to how people actually speak in English, like the cool expressions, or even the way things are phrased casually. But here's a question. How do you make sure you're actually learning and not just singing along for fun?
Great question. While singing along is definitely fun, it's important to actively engage with the song. One strategy is to pick a song, then read the lyrics as you listen. This way, you can catch any words or phrases you don't understand and look them up. Once you're familiar with the song, try singing along and mimicking the pronunciation and intonation of the singer. You'll be surprised how much that can improve your speaking skills.
So it's about being intentional with the music. It's not just passive listening. What's your advice for beginners who might feel overwhelmed by fast-paced songs?
For beginners, I recommend starting with slower songs or those with clearer lyrics. Songs like Let It Be by the Beatles or Hello by Adele are great because they have clear pronunciation and a slower pace. You can also choose songs with a more repetitive chorus, which makes it easier to remember the words. As you get more comfortable, you can move on to faster songs with more complex vocabulary.
Nice. So, by starting with simpler songs, you can gradually build your confidence and understanding before tackling more challenging music. I also love how music can expose you to culture. You're not just learning language, you're also understanding how people express emotions and ideas through song lyrics.
Exactly. Music is a fantastic way to learn about the culture behind the language. For example, if you listen to American pop songs, you'll learn expressions that are common in everyday conversations, but you'll also get a sense of the emotions and experiences that are important in that culture. It's a great way to build cultural context, which is essential when learning any language.
That's a really great point. Language and culture go hand in hand. So how do you recommend using music if someone wants to improve their pronunciation specifically?
Music is a great tool for improving pronunciation, especially through shadowing. Just like with audiobooks, you can repeat the lyrics along with the singer. Pay attention to how they pronounce each word, the rhythm of their speech, and their intonation. Try to match their speed and accent. This practice helps you sound more natural when you speak. And if you're feeling adventurous, you can even try to sing along with the song to practice your pronunciation in a fun way.
Right, so it's not just about repeating the words, it's about mimicking the flow of the language too.
Exactly. The rhythm, the rise and fall of the voice, the pauses, all of that contributes to sounding more fluent. And because you're doing it with music, it doesn't feel like practice. You're enjoying it, and the language just comes naturally.
I've got to say, that's pretty motivating. Plus, once you know the song well enough, you can sing along without even thinking about the words. It's like your brain is absorbing the language passively while you're just enjoying the music.
Exactly. And another fun way to use music is to explore different genres. For example, rap songs can introduce you to slang and fast speech, while ballads will help you understand emotional expressions. So, no matter what genre you're into, there's always something new to learn.
Music really is a fun and versatile learning tool. From improving vocabulary and pronunciation to understanding culture, it's an all-in-one resource. I think we've covered a lot of great ways to use listening, whether through podcasts, audiobooks, or music. But Sophia, what's your top tip for someone who wants to start using music to learn English?
My top tip is to start with music you already love. When you're passionate about the song, you'll be more motivated to learn the lyrics and pay attention to the language. And don't be afraid to sing along. It's one of the most enjoyable and effective ways to learn.
Great advice. So, for everyone listening, pick a song, learn the lyrics, and start singing along. You'll be surprised at how much you can pick up. All right, we've covered a lot today, but before we wrap up, let's recap some of the key takeaways.
Definitely. We've talked about how listening, whether it's through podcasts, audiobooks, or music, helps you improve your English skills by giving you exposure to the natural flow of the language. Each tool offers a unique benefit, but together they create a powerful, immersive experience that makes learning English fun and effective.
Exactly. So, whether you're tuning into podcasts on your commute, enjoying an audiobook on your lunch break, or singing your heart out to a song, remember that consistent listening will build your language skills over time. Don't rush it. Just enjoy the process and let the language flow in naturally.
Totally. And keep experimenting with different tools. You never know what will click for you, but the more you try, the more you'll discover what works best.
Now, we're going to dive into a really fascinating aspect of language learning: subconscious learning. Now, this concept might sound a little mysterious, but trust me, it's super powerful. Sophia, can you explain what we mean when we talk about subconscious learning in the context of language acquisition?
Of course, Adam. Subconscious learning is when you absorb information without actively thinking about it. It's the process where your brain picks up things like vocabulary, grammar rules, and pronunciation without you consciously trying to memorize them. It's similar to how you learned your first language as a child. You didn't sit down and study rules, you just picked up language by hearing it all around you.
Ah, that makes sense. So, when we're listening to podcasts, audiobooks, or music, we're not just actively learning words or grammar, we're also soaking up language patterns and structures on a deeper subconscious level.
Exactly. Your brain is constantly processing the language, even if you're not fully aware of it. For example, when you listen to a story in English, your brain is picking up how sentences are formed, how verbs change depending on the tense, and how different phrases are used in context. Over time, you'll start to use those structures without even thinking about them.
That's incredible. So, it's not just about studying grammar or vocabulary in isolation, it's about letting the language sink in naturally. How does this unconscious process actually help improve fluency, though?
Well, when you're subconsciously learning, you're not focused on translating from your native language to English, which slows you down. Instead, you start thinking directly in English. This shift is what makes fluent speakers sound so natural. They're not translating, they're just thinking and speaking in English, and this happens because their subconscious brain has absorbed the patterns of the language.
So, by listening to English content consistently, like podcasts or songs, you're essentially training your brain to think in English over time?
Exactly. And the best part is, you don't have to actively try to memorize every single rule. By exposing yourself to English in a variety of contexts, your brain starts to make connections automatically. This is why, when you listen to the same podcast or audiobook multiple times, you start noticing things you didn't catch the first time. It's like your brain is gradually building a database of language that you can draw from without thinking.
That's amazing. So it's all about consistent exposure, and it sounds like the key is to not overthink it, right? Just keep listening and let your subconscious do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. It's about trusting the process. The more you immerse yourself in the language, whether it's through listening or even speaking, the more your subconscious mind starts to do the work. And this can happen even when you're not actively trying to learn. For example, you could be walking down the street and hear a sentence in English. Your brain processes it in the background, and the next time you hear something similar, you'll recognize it right away and even be able to use it in conversation.
Wow, that sounds almost magical. But I'm guessing that's why it's important to keep your language input varied. I mean, listening to just one type of content might not give you a full picture of the language, right?
Exactly. The more variety, the better. Listening to different accents, topics, and types of content, whether it's formal news reports, casual conversations, or even comedy, helps your brain pick up on different nuances. It also exposes you to various ways of speaking, like formal versus informal language, slang, idioms, and different cultural references. All of that gives you a well-rounded understanding of the language and how it's used in different contexts.
That's a great point. So, when it comes to the subconscious, variety is key. But is there anything specific you can do to help your subconscious learning along?
Definitely. One thing you can do is to listen to content that's just slightly above your current level. This helps challenge your brain without overwhelming it. For example, if you're a beginner, try listening to intermediate-level podcasts or audiobooks. This gives your brain enough new information to work with without making you feel frustrated. And don't forget about repetition. Hearing the same phrases or vocabulary multiple times is essential for reinforcing those connections in your subconscious mind.
Repetition, huh? So, even though it might seem like you're just listening to the same content over and over, it's actually helping your brain make deeper connections.
Exactly. Your brain needs that repetition to solidify the patterns of the language. And over time, those connections become stronger, making it easier for you to understand and use the language without having to think about it too much.
That's powerful. So, it sounds like the key to subconscious learning is to make language input consistent, varied, and engaging. When you combine that with your own active practice, the results can be amazing.
Absolutely. Just make sure you're enjoying the process. The more fun and engaging your learning is, the more likely your brain will absorb the language naturally. Over time, you'll notice your language skills improving without even trying.
So, to wrap up this segment, subconscious learning is all about immersing yourself in English and letting your brain pick up the patterns naturally. Keep listening, keep engaging with the language, and trust the process. Over time, you'll be amazed at how much you learn without even realizing it.
Exactly. And don't stress about perfection. Language learning is a journey, and the more you enjoy it, the more your subconscious mind will work its magic.
All right. We've covered some fantastic methods for improving your English through listening, but we all know that learning a language is never without its challenges. In this segment, we're going to discuss some common listening challenges language learners face and share practical tips on how to overcome them. Sophia, what are some of the biggest hurdles people face when it comes to listening in English?
Well, Adam, one of the biggest challenges learners face is understanding fast speech. English speakers, especially in podcasts or movies, tend to speak very quickly, and it can feel overwhelming to catch every word. This is especially difficult for beginners or intermediate learners who aren't used to the pace of natural speech.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. When you're trying to follow a conversation and it's happening so quickly, It can be frustrating. How can learners overcome this challenge?
The key is practice and patience. When you first start listening to fast speech, it's normal to miss words. But don't let that discourage you. One thing I recommend is to start with slower-paced content, like podcasts designed for learners or audiobooks. Once you're comfortable with those, gradually work your way up to faster content. You can also use the pause button. Pause the audio after a sentence or phrase, repeat it, and then play it again to catch anything you missed. Over time, you'll build the ability to keep up with faster speech.
Great tip with the pause button. I think that really helps with digesting content in manageable pieces. Another common challenge is vocabulary. Sometimes you'll hear words that you've never encountered before, and that can throw you off. How do you recommend dealing with that?
Great point. It's normal to encounter unfamiliar words, and while it can be frustrating, it's actually a fantastic opportunity to expand your vocabulary. My advice is to not focus too much on every unknown word. Instead, try to understand the meaning from context. If you don't get it, make a mental note of the word and look it up later. Another technique is to listen for patterns. If you hear a word repeatedly in different contexts, you can start guessing its meaning. Eventually, those new words will become more familiar as you hear them again.
Exactly. Context is key. It's so much more effective to learn words in context than to try to memorize them in isolation. Now, another challenge I hear a lot about is accents. English is spoken in so many different accents, and learners often feel overwhelmed when they encounter a new one. How can listeners adapt to different accents?
Accents are a huge part of learning English, and you're right, they can be tricky at first. But the good news is, with exposure, you'll get better at understanding them. One tip is to start listening to content with a specific accent. For example, focus on British podcasts for a while, then switch to Australian or American accents. This gives you a deeper understanding of each accent's nuances. It's also helpful to listen to a variety of content, like news reports, podcasts, movies, or even YouTube videos, because different speakers will use different accents and speaking styles.
That's a great strategy. So it's about actively seeking exposure to different accents to train your ear. Another challenge I hear often is listening fatigue. Sometimes it's just hard to stay focused, especially when you're listening to long podcasts or audiobooks. How can learners avoid burnout and keep their motivation high?
Listening fatigue is real, especially when you're doing it for long stretches. My tip is to break your listening practice into short sessions. Instead of listening for an hour straight, try 15 to 20-minute chunks. Focus on quality, not quantity. Also, try varying your listening activities. Switch between podcasts, music, and audiobooks. This keeps things fresh and interesting. And remember, it's okay to take breaks. You don't need to be constantly listening to improve your language skills. Giving your brain a rest is just as important.
Good point. Keeping things varied and manageable can really help prevent burnout. And I think it's important to celebrate small wins along the way, right? Like if you understand a few more words or follow a conversation you didn't understand before, that's a huge accomplishment.
Exactly. Don't underestimate those small victories. Every bit of progress is a step forward, and celebrating those wins helps keep you motivated. Also, try to remember why you're learning English in the first place. Whether it's for work, travel, or personal growth, that reminder can fuel your motivation during tough times.
That's such a great point, Sophia. Staying connected to your why can really push you through the tough moments. And speaking of staying motivated, what about learners who feel like they've hit a plateau? How can they break through and keep improving?
Plateaus are totally normal in language learning. If you feel like you're stuck, it might be time to change up your routine. Maybe you need to try a different type of content, or even practice with a conversation partner. Challenging yourself with new material, whether it's more complex podcasts or trying to listen to more spontaneous, unscripted conversations, can help push you past that plateau. And remember, language learning is a journey. It's not always linear, so be patient with yourself.
Such great advice. So if you feel stuck, try to switch things up, get creative with your learning, and just keep going. Overcoming challenges is part of the process.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're a sign that you're learning and growing. Keep challenging yourself, stay consistent, and trust the process.
Absolutely. So, to recap, overcoming listening challenges comes down to being patient with yourself, practicing regularly, and finding ways to keep things fresh and fun. Whether it's speeding up your listening pace, dealing with unknown vocabulary, or getting used to different accents, consistency and variety will help you push through those obstacles. Keep going, and you'll see results. All right, now we're going to talk about how combining listening with speaking can accelerate your language learning. Now, we've already discussed how listening can improve your understanding of English, but speaking is where the magic truly happens when it comes to fluency. Sophia, why is combining these two skills so important for learners?
Great question, Adam. Listening and speaking go hand in hand because they both reinforce each other. Listening helps you understand how the language sounds, the rhythm, pronunciation, and structure, while speaking helps you actively produce and use what you've learned. By practicing both skills together, you can really start to connect what you hear with what you say, making your language learning experience more natural and fluid.
I love that. So it's not just about passively absorbing information, but actively using it. But I imagine this can be intimidating for some people. How do learners overcome the fear of speaking?
Absolutely, Adam. A lot of learners feel self-conscious when they start speaking because they're afraid of making mistakes. But I always say, embrace the mistakes. They're actually a sign that you're trying and learning. One way to overcome this fear is by speaking in low-pressure environments. For example, practicing with a language exchange partner, or even talking to yourself in English. The more you practice speaking, the more confident you'll become.
Talking to yourself, that's a great tip. It's a great way to practice without the fear of judgment. But what about when you're listening to a podcast or audiobook? How can you incorporate speaking while you're doing that?
Great question. A simple but effective technique is shadowing. This is when you listen to a short audio clip, whether it's from a podcast, audiobook, or even a song, and then repeat what you hear immediately after. You try to match the speaker's pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm as closely as possible. This helps train your mouth to form the words correctly and improves your speaking fluency. Plus, it reinforces what you've learned by listening.
I've heard of shadowing. It's such a powerful technique because you're essentially practicing in real time. You're listening and speaking simultaneously, which accelerates your learning. But I imagine this can be tricky for beginners. How can they start with shadowing if they're not confident in their speaking yet?
For beginners, start with short, slow-paced clips. Something simple like a sentence or two. Don't worry if you don't get it right the first time. The goal is to get used to the rhythm and sound of the language. You can even slow down the audio speed if you need to. As you get more comfortable, you can gradually increase the length and complexity of the clips.
So slow and steady wins the race. Start small, then build up your confidence. Another technique I've heard of is repeat after me exercises. This is where you listen to a phrase or sentence and then repeat it as closely as possible. Is this similar to shadowing?
Yes, it's very similar. Repeat after me is a great exercise for beginners because it's less intense than full shadowing. You can take short sentences or phrases and practice them until you're comfortable with the sounds. It helps with pronunciation, rhythm, and building muscle memory for how to form words. I'd recommend doing this with real-life phrases, like greetings or common questions that you might use in a conversation.
That's awesome. So, both techniques, shadowing and repeat after me, help you connect listening and speaking in a practical, hands-on way. But I think something that holds a lot of learners back is the feeling of not having anyone to practice speaking with. How do you overcome that?
Great point. One way to solve that problem is by finding a language partner, even if it's just online. There are a ton of language exchange apps and websites where you can connect with native speakers who want to learn your language. Even if you don't have access to a partner, you can practice speaking by thinking in English throughout the day. For example, when you're walking down the street or cooking dinner, try describing what you're doing in English. This helps you start thinking in the language and building that connection between listening and speaking.
I love that idea, thinking in English. It's a great way to practice speaking in your mind before you actually do it out loud. And I guess if you can start speaking in your head, then speaking out loud in conversations will feel more natural, right?
Exactly. The more you practice thinking and speaking in English, the more natural it will become. And speaking doesn't have to happen in formal situations all the time. You can practice with family, friends, or even pets. The important part is to get used to forming sentences and using the language, no matter who's listening.
True. And it's so rewarding when you start to feel comfortable speaking, right? It's like the pieces finally come together. I think combining listening and speaking is one of the best ways to build confidence and fluency.
Absolutely. And over time, you'll notice that as your listening improves, your speaking will naturally improve too. They really complement each other. The more you listen to different accents, intonations, and phrases, the more you can incorporate those into your own speech.
Such great advice. So, to sum up this segment, the key is to practice both listening and speaking consistently. Whether it's through shadowing, repeat after me, or simply speaking to yourself, the more you combine both skills, the more fluent and confident you'll become.
That's right. And don't forget to have fun with it. The more you enjoy speaking and listening, the easier it will be to improve.
Okay, so let's talk about something really important. Personalized listening strategies. As we all know, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to language learning. What works for one person might not work for another. So, how can learners create a listening strategy that's tailored to their own needs and goals? Sophia, what are some key factors to consider when designing a personalized listening plan?
Great question, Adam. When it comes to personalized listening strategies, the first thing to think about is your current level of proficiency. Are you a beginner, intermediate, or advanced learner? This will determine the type of content you should be focusing on. For example, beginners might benefit more from slower-paced, clear speech, like language learning podcasts or beginner audiobooks. Advanced learners, on the other hand, can handle faster-paced content like native podcasts, movies, or news reports. So the strategy really starts with understanding where you are in your language journey.
Right, so understanding your current level is key. What's next after that?
The next step is to think about your goals. What do you want to achieve with your listening practice? Are you focused on improving your general fluency, or are you preparing for something specific, like a job interview or a trip abroad? Your goals will guide the type of content you choose. For example, if you're getting ready for a business interview, you might want to listen to podcasts or audiobooks that focus on business English or industry-specific vocabulary. If you're preparing for travel, you might want to focus on conversational English, like phrases for ordering food or asking for directions.
That's a great point. So, personalizing your strategy means selecting content that aligns with your specific goals. I imagine another factor is interest. If you're listening to something that excites you, you're more likely to stick with it. How do you recommend incorporating personal interests into a listening strategy?
Exactly. If you're interested in the content you're listening to, it will be much easier to stay motivated. Think about topics or hobbies you're passionate about, whether it's sports, music, technology, or even storytelling. By incorporating content that aligns with your personal interests, you make the process more engaging. For example, if you love cooking, listen to cooking shows in English, or if you enjoy sports, try sports podcasts. This keeps the learning process fun and relevant.
That's brilliant. So, by picking content that's both level appropriate and interesting, you're more likely to stay engaged. But what about those who feel overwhelmed by the vast amount of content out there? How can they narrow down their choices?
Good question. It can be overwhelming, but it's all about starting small and gradually expanding. Begin by choosing just a few resources that fit your level and goals. For example, pick one podcast that's within your current comprehension level and stick with it for a week or two. Once you're comfortable with that, slowly add more variety. You can alternate between podcasts, audiobooks, and even YouTube videos to keep things fresh and diverse. Over time, you'll know which resources resonate with you and what types of content you enjoy the most.
Sounds like it's all about starting simple and building from there. But what if a learner hits a point where they feel like they're not improving, or the content just isn't challenging enough? How can they adjust their strategy?
If you ever feel like the content is getting too easy or you're not learning as much, that's a sign that it's time to level up. Try listening to slightly more complex material. For example, if you've been listening to beginner-level podcasts, challenge yourself with intermediate-level content. You can also increase the length of your listening sessions or try to listen to faster-paced speakers. The key is to gently push yourself beyond your comfort zone without overwhelming yourself.
Great advice. It's about finding that sweet spot where you're slightly challenged but not completely lost. Now, I've heard of the term active listening. How does that fit into a personalized listening strategy?
Active listening is a really important technique. It's about being fully engaged with the content rather than just passively listening. When you listen actively, you're not just hearing the words, but you're also paying attention to how sentences are structured, how words are pronounced, and what vocabulary is being used. You can practice this by taking notes, repeating phrases out loud, or even pausing the audio to think about what you've heard. Active listening helps reinforce your learning and makes it more intentional.
So, active listening is about being engaged and involved in the process, rather than just letting the information wash over you. I imagine this makes the listening experience much more productive.
Exactly. It's about quality over quantity. You don't have to listen to hours of content every day. Instead, focus on being present and really absorbing what you hear. The more you actively engage with the material, the more you'll improve.
I love that. So, to create a personalized listening strategy, you need to factor in your level, your goals, and your personal interests, and then make sure you're listening actively and progressively challenging yourself. It's all about staying consistent and engaged.
That's right. And don't forget to mix things up. Try different formats, accents, and topics to keep the experience fresh and enjoyable. As long as you're enjoying the process and adapting your strategy as you go, you'll see improvement.
Such great advice. So, to sum up, personalized listening strategies are all about aligning your content with your level, goals, and interests, staying actively engaged with the material, and challenging yourself progressively. Keep tweaking your approach to find what works best for you.
Exactly. And remember, there's no one-size-fits-all method. Find what excites you and keeps you motivated, and make listening a regular part of your language routine.
Fantastic. All right, we've covered a lot today, from the power of listening to combining listening with speaking, overcoming challenges, and designing a personalized listening strategy. We hope these tips help you improve your English skills in a way that's fun and tailored just for you.
We've shared a lot of great tools, and now it's time for you to start implementing them. Make sure to keep practicing, stay consistent, and most importantly, enjoy the journey.
All right, we've talked a lot about strategies and techniques for improving your listening skills. But now let's take it a step further and dive into the actual tools and resources you can use to boost your listening practice. There's an overwhelming amount of content out there, so what are some of the best platforms and resources for learners, Sophia?
Great point, Adam. With the right tools, language learning becomes much more efficient and fun. The first tool I'd recommend is podcast platforms. There are so many podcasts out there, and many of them are specifically designed for English learners. Platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts have sections dedicated to language learning. Some podcasts are more casual, while others focus on grammar, vocabulary, or specific accents. For beginners, I'd recommend looking for slow, clear podcasts that speak directly to learners, like The English We Speak or BBC Learning English.
Those are great recommendations. And as your skills grow, you can start listening to more advanced podcasts like TED Talks Daily or The Daily by the New York Times. But let's talk about audiobooks. There's something really immersive about them, and they're a great resource for listening practice. Where can people find audiobooks that are suited for learners?
Audiobooks are amazing because they allow you to experience stories and information in a dynamic way. For learners, platforms like Audible, LibriVox, and Storynori are fantastic. Audible has a huge range of books in various difficulty levels, while LibriVox offers free audiobooks of classic literature. Storynori is a great resource for kids, but the stories are wonderful for beginner and intermediate learners too. You can start with easy books and gradually progress to more complex ones as your skills improve.
That's a fantastic selection. Now let's talk about YouTube. It's not just for videos, but also a goldmine for language learning. What channels would you recommend for learners who want to practice their listening skills?
YouTube is a great tool because you have both audio and visual elements working together. Channels like English Addict with Mr. Duncan, Rachel's English, and BBC Learning English offer fantastic content that covers pronunciation, vocabulary, and real-life English conversations. Another fantastic one is English Class 101, which provides lessons for all levels, including listening practice through dialogues and cultural insights. You can even slow down the videos if you need a bit more time to catch the words.
That's a brilliant way to engage both the visual and auditory parts of learning. Now, what about apps? There are so many language learning apps out there. Which ones do you think are best for enhancing listening skills? That's a brilliant way to engage both the visual and auditory parts of learning. Now, what about apps? There are so many language learning apps out there. Which ones do you think are best for enhancing listening skills?
There are a lot of great language apps. Duolingo is one of the most popular, and while it's a good all-rounder, it also has exercises for listening comprehension. Memrise focuses a lot on natural listening with real-world native speaker videos. Another app I'd recommend is Rosetta Stone, which uses immersion techniques and allows you to practice listening in context. HelloTalk is another great app. It connects you with native speakers for chat and voice messages, giving you real, conversational listening practice.
I'm really glad you mentioned HelloTalk. It's such a unique way to practice listening with real people, which makes the experience so much more authentic. And for those who enjoy music, Lyric Straining is an excellent app. It helps you learn through songs, and you can match the lyrics with what you hear to improve your listening accuracy. Music is such a fun way to connect with the language.
That's such a fun tool. Lyric Straining is great because it helps you with listening to different accents and speeds while also helping you pick up new vocabulary. There are also websites like TED-Ed and LLO that provide free downloadable listening activities with transcripts, quizzes, and interactive lessons, which is super helpful.
Those are all fantastic resources to check out. And to wrap up this segment, I want to remind everyone that the best tool is the one that fits your personal learning style. Whether it's podcasts, audiobooks, YouTube channels, apps, or songs, find what resonates with you and make listening a regular part of your routine. Well, we've covered a lot today, haven't we? From understanding the power of listening in language learning to combining listening with speaking, designing personalized strategies, and now sharing some amazing resources to boost your practice. It's clear that listening isn't just about hearing words. It's about engaging with the language on multiple levels and actively working to improve your fluency.
Exactly, Adam. Whether you're listening to a podcast, audiobook, or even music, the key is to stay consistent, stay motivated, and make listening an integral part of your language journey. And remember, language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. So enjoy the process and celebrate the small wins along the way.
And with the right resources and strategies, you'll see noticeable improvement. So start small, stay patient, and keep pushing yourself to listen more, speak more, and learn more.
We hope today's episode has given you some valuable insights and tools to take your English learning to the next level. Don't forget to check out the resources we've mentioned and start incorporating some of these strategies into your practice.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll be back with more tips and strategies to help you on your language learning journey. Until then, keep listening, keep learning, and most importantly, enjoy every step of the process.
Goodbye for now and happy learning to you all.